I think you've talked with people in other interviews before about the differences between female and male serial killers, as an example, because I know you've researched a lot of serial killers. And it was something about the whole hunt and gather aspect that a male serial killer is more likely to hunt, whereas a female serial killer, again, these are generalizations, but they're more likely to gather. Black widows, things like that.
Well, there's no question. I mean, there's certainly some evolutionary psychologists who insist that these differences that we see between male and female serial killers, and there are differences, due to some evolutionary throwback. That, the fact that at one point men were out there hunting and bringing home meat and all that somehow predisposed them when they began, serial killing, to be hunters of strangers, for example, to be more sexually motivated, to be more interested in power. Whereas when you look at female serial killers, you do see, for the most part, differences. They're much more likely to kill people that they know, to kill people in vulnerable positions. They're much more likely to get away with it for a longer period of time. They're much more likely to be financially motivated, or to kill somebody for convenience. In other words, I'm tired of you, I want somebody else, so here's a convenient way for me to get rid of you. You very rarely ever see a female serial killer whose interest does it for sexual motives. Sometimes you have this partnership that will develop, and that's a whole nother, I guess, can of worms, where you have a dominant partner and
was it Paul something or another, and Kristen in Canada? I forgot the name of the company.
Yeah, there's Paul Homolka, and I'm blanking also on her name. Karla.
She's Homolka. She's Karla
Homolka. He's Paul. What is his?
Bernard?
Bernard, yes, Paul Bernard, yeah, and he's still in prison, and she was released, several years ago, and has a family, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a situation which I think is kind of interesting, because I think a lot of times when you look at these male-female serial killer teams, it may start out as one person kind of being dominant or having these fantasies and really driving the boat or the car in terms of looking for victims and having this agenda. But I do think that over time that relationship can change. And there have certainly been situations where the woman may have started out being the kind of the secondary partner, but it kind of takes on a life of its own for her. And I know in that particular case of Karla Homolka and Paul Bernard, there was a lot of evidence that regardless of how she started out, that at some point she became a fully active participant and seemed to enjoy some of the activities that they were engaging in. One of the things I will say is, there's an argument, I guess, that could be made that we underestimate women in general. But I certainly think we underestimate women and their capacity for violence. Now, of course, 90% of all homicides are committed by men. So I'm certainly not here to say that, there's an equal share of violent behavior that occurs. But, one of the things that I think is interesting is that when you look at female serial killers, who are much rarer than male serial killers, what you find, though, is I think our cultural underestimation of women does allow them to kind of fly under the radar a lot longer and get away with more murders and be more active before they tend to be caught.
Okay, and I wanted to explore too the female serial killers and the gathering principle. It seems almost like, while yes, they're committing crime, they're almost suffering themselves. Like the male's out, they go hunt, they kill, they get it kind of over with. But if you really hate somebody or despise somebody or something, and you live with them over a period of time, that's a completely different state of mind and being, isn't it?
Well, I think that certainly, we could argue that there are different motives, as we've already talked about, for female serial killers and male serial killers. I think it's pretty chilling to think about, for example, a woman who is poisoning members of her family and nursing them back to health, and then making them sick again, and then eventually killing them. I think that gathering principle is pretty chilling when you think about it in terms of, this is somebody this person knows. And there have been female serial killers. It's kind of interesting, Eric, that when Aileen Wuornos was back, when she was kind of called the first female serial killer. And I think the reason that she was called that was because she operated more like we think of a male serial killer, that she is somebody who killed strangers and said that they were trying to rape her. And there was a lot of inconsistent evidence to that effect. It seems like she was just really angry, and she went out and murdered some innocent victims. And it was kind of almost, it was ironic that she was touted as, here's the first female serial killer. And I just had this fantasy sometimes of kind of this legacy of female serial killers kind of chuckling in their graves, thinking that, wow, there's this woman out there who's killing 6 or 7 men. There have been women like Jane Toppan back in the early 1900s who killed more than 30 individuals, including, her foster sister and, numerous people that she knew and loved, and just seemed to really delight in doing that.